on his promise while campaigning to give autonomy to Black Americans. My question to you, can you say if he was being malicious, or is it true?
You recall that when candidate Obama decided to seek the presidency, that Reverend Jeremiah Wright emerged in the public's eye as an important person in his spiritual life. If you, Mr. Walker, go to a so-called black church. I now live in the South, and I lived in Montgomery, Alabama, and we used to go to various churches, including Rosa Parks Church. You will see at Ebenezer Baptist Church on a Sunday morning, you will hear religious sermons, homilies, or whatever, intertwined with socio-economic political issues. There is a kind of urgency in the religious community not to be too liturgical, not to use a fancy word which I use, eschatological, not to be too much cathedra, but to bring the church to the people. Now, I'll tell you this. When we lived in Cameroon, we used to go to a Catholic church that was called syncretic. Churches that took in some of the norms of the society, embedded it into the delivery and behavior of congregants that touched on these types of issues. Jeremiah Wright comes out of the firebrand side of theology and is perhaps more graphic in his explanations of these inequities that he perceives to be a reality. Now, in the real world in which we live, candidate Obama was faced with this question as to whether his allegiance to his spiritual mentor was becoming a burden for his own political candidacy. And I think from facts of what we've seen that his association with Jeremy Wright, what was his name? Jeremiah Wright, was sort of changed, or not as strong a bond. Now, about black autonomy. I don't know if we're using the word, both of us, in the same sense, autonomy. For me, autonomy means you have a right to look out for your own destiny as a community, or even as a nation, or even, say, in the European Union, where Brussels is trying to tell Dublin what to do, and they said, no, you're not going to invade my independence or autonomy. So I'm not sure exactly if we're using the term in the same way. But black community self-realization is evident in pockets and not so evident in many pockets. I challenge you to come and visit me in Atlanta, and we'll go on some trips together. and you will see some disparities that you would imagine should not exist in modern America. Hence, the question of poverty comes back to President Obama. And it is not just poverty among the black community. Poverty runs through the various communities. Take some time. I used to live in Los Angeles before, some years ago, and East LA is one thing to see. Compton is another thing. I was in Watts the day when they captured Patty Hearst, who was hiding out with, what's that group? The Symbionese Liberation Army. I was down there. And you could see these differences. And guess where I lived? I lived near Beverly Hills, right? Not, you're surprised. And not because I was wealthy, I just found a place there. And those stark realities in America has now come back to the president for his attention. He was distracted unnecessarily or forced into distraction over this, quarreling with the Republicans. He had a health care notion, Affordable Care Act, and he wanted that enacted, right? He got the support from the Supreme Court, he got and they still fought against him. Well, the question of poverty, which he referred to early in his campaign, has come now home to him, even in his party of the so-called progressives. He has to come to terms with that. And if I saw the president, and I would be very polite, and I'd say, Mr. President, you have to come to terms with that. Well, apparently, recently, he has come out in that big speech about war and poverty a la Lyndon Johnson. Mr. Walker, I hope I have helped. Sir.
Ambassador Scarlett, Professor Gray from SALISES.
Yes.
I like that you began your talk by referring to the enigmatic character of Obama. But not just the enigmatic as a personality, but the character of his foreign policy and the stewardship of American foreign policy would appear to be enigmatic in the sense that it has confounded his admirers and supporters, admirers on the left and supporters, and his critics on the right. And so I want to direct you to the question of the enigmatic character of Obama's stewardship of U.S. foreign policy in the context of the ongoing debate about the decline of American hegemony in the world and the role that Obama is perceived to be playing in that recognition of a decline. So that in the Congress, they recognize that the United States is an empire, and they use words like global stewardship and the like, and they criticize Obama for supervising the U.S. decline and not reasserting Americans' imperial authority. So my question to you is, in the context of the debate about America's place in the world, and in the context of debate about the enigmatic character of Obama's foreign policy against the backdrop of Bush and against the claims that he's made for himself to be a Christian realist, somebody who recognizes that there's danger in the world, but wants to be a humanitarian at the same time. So how do you situate Obama in the context of the need for saber rattling by the critics on the right, and the need for a more liberal, even retreatist approach on the left?
I'm not sure, even though I use the word enigmatic, that it might be the best characterization of President Obama. I think it is, but I'm not completely sure. And my reservation lies in a full understanding of his logic in face of these two wings that you refer to. in dealing with them. When one is outside of politics, in my case, carrying out the business of America, in other people's cases, critiquing how America conducts its business, these are all honorable responsibilities. And as I said in my paper in one paragraph, that Barack Obama would not want you to refuse to challenge him and give him a critical analysis as constructive as to his performance. He would have felt as if you were not doing your job as an observer or a citizen or an international spokesperson. Now, the decline of America, I characterize it in another way. It's the rise of others. It's not that the preponderance of American power has diminished, because Obama said you cannot have imperial might, which he would not, you would disavow, but for my discussion, to have imperial right based upon coercion or potential use of power. Right? But, on the other hand, he's not willing to abrogate his responsibilities by diminishing the American power potential. So he said, as I mentioned before, he wants a lean, efficient military. Because, as I mentioned earlier, there are nefarious actors in the world. But the answer is not just might, but what Obama calls his other side, persuasion. But persuasion is more palpable when you see concrete actions that suggest to people that is not just word, but deed. If you want to persuade some of these people who are fence-sitters, who are honestly critical for good reason, you have to say to him, Mr. President, demonstrate what you mean when you say that you are willing to be helpful to have a world that's better for all. Don't give me, people would say, this beautiful rhetorical responses. So you are right that that America's position in the world is different. It is not different, in my humble opinion, because it's a decline. It's a rise of other powers. There is a group of powers, you know, called the BRIC. Brazil, Russia, India, and China. But there is a new group you didn't hear. The same